I'm not sure where this grabs the thumbnails for YouTube from. It seems to be a few frames in, so I'm going to hold this up, hoping to at least get, something interesting. And this is Van Gogh in an absinthe bottle, which is pretty interesting, as it was right behind me, and it was either that or a flower pot. This is a piece from a chapter called Skunk. It's about Gerald's girlfriend, Orla Finney. She had a skunk in her backyard. She lived with her mother, and her father had died. She was in grad school, and she got a job as a cocktail waitress at a local restaurant. This is after the skunk thing is over, and they kind of had a slight odor of skunk still in their clothes, which they didn't realize until they got to the restaurant. But Orla has taken her mother and Gerald to the restaurant for dinner, and they're sitting down to eat, and the waiter comes over. Our waiter came over, a tall, extremely effeminate young man. He said his name was Art. Orla told me about him and the rest of the staff. She said, all the men, including the manager, are gay. It's so much fun. They snip at each other, make catty remarks, have crushes. It's like being in junior high school again. They all want to talk to me, confide in me about their boyfriends. I just listen and smack my gum and give out droll advice because, after all, I am a cocktail waitress, and that's what's expected, right? I should be a streetwise, hardened girl with a heart of gold. A couple of kids at home and a husband who wears a T-shirt while he sits in a recliner, drinks beer, and slaps me on the ass when I walk past and calls me babe. The kind of life I could give you, huh? I said. She laughed. It was a nice meal, nothing spectacular, but properly prepared and made interesting as it could have come out of a time capsule from 1966. Mrs. Finney stayed pleasant through dessert. When we got back to their place, she immediately got all the coats from the closet and put them and the ones she and Orla had been wearing in the trunk of her car to take to the cleaners. She barely mentioned skunk under her breath as she did it. Orla's restaurant job didn't last long as the restaurant closed down in a few months. Location might have been an issue as it was between a discount department store and a two-screen movie theater. Later in the spring, we were going to a bar that had a band. We were going to pick up our friend Kate, her date, and her brother John, who was also a friend. This is a typical Columbus North End sort of relationship among Catholics, in that many things are intertwined. I knew Kate and John's sister Amy, who worked with Orla at the store all those years ago. I stayed in touch as we had other friends in common, so I'd followed this family of 9 kids and known about them for years now. John was a slightly built fellow, which is being generous, as he was a tiny little guy, a miniature Irishman of about 120 pounds. He was 25 years of age from a large family, all of them smart. The oldest 5 now struggling to get through college as their father had died and their mother was trying to make it on her own. John looked younger than his age and by most accounts was very cute. Not what he was going for, but it was what he got. He didn't have a girlfriend, which bothered him quite a bit. It was a social aspect of having no one and the emotional aspect of being lonely, feeling he was getting old and missing out on a complete life. It also bothered him that a lot of gay men were attracted to him as well. He was intellectual and otherwise liberal, enjoyed good food, jazz music, and had a bohemian lifestyle. He was nervous and uncomfortable around gays. I think he thought in some Catholic sort of a way, if he didn't have a girlfriend and he hung out with gays, he might be absorbed into their lifestyle. Orla and I found that aspect of his personality pretty amusing, especially when he'd screw up his face when an obviously gay man would come near us at a bar or a party. We knew he was harmless and just putting on a show to prove to us he was straight. John's mother had told me about John's woes, his anguish over not having a girlfriend. I asked her, is there a girl he likes and wants to date? John worked as a waiter at the same place Andy had worked before leaving Columbus, a high-end top of a bank-building restaurant. His mother said, oh, he has this thing for a girl named Sonya who comes up to his restaurant every Wednesday night. They flirt and he tells me about it. It isn't likely to come to anything. She's a performer someplace, and after her show she stops by for a late dinner and drinks with her boyfriend. John says she's nearly 6 feet tall and this gorgeous blonde. John is a wonderful young man and would make a great boyfriend for a lucky girl, but I can't see him with a girl like that. Well, that big. She'd be twice his size. It's all just him imagining, having a fantasy. He'll find a girl sometime. He just needs to wait for the right one. We picked up Kate and her boyfriend, and we're going to pick John up at his second job at a different restaurant in an open-air shopping mall. When we got there and parked at the curb across from a courtyard, we could see the restaurant and the outside seating area with its tables under large umbrellas. As we waited there was a sudden thunderstorm with winds that blew the tables over and a very heavy rain that made it nearly impossible to see to the restaurant. We did make out John, who ran from inside. He was removing and collapsing the umbrellas, righting the tables, and in general putting things back in order in the pouring rain. He's a very skinny guy anyway, but with his hair plastered down by the water and his shirt sticking to him like wet tissue paper, he appeared elf-like. About then a car pulled up behind us. The rain was still falling, but not as hard. We heard a high-pitched, effeminate scream and saw a tall, lanky young man squealing and nearly dancing across the courtyard with a newspaper over his head. When he got underneath the awning of the restaurant next to John, he looked back at the person who had dropped him off and screamed, "My hair is ruined!" Knowing John's lack of fondness for gays made his wincing and turning away pretty funny for all of us. Orla said, "Hey, I know that guy. It's Art from where I used to work. You remember him, Gerald." I affirmed that I did remember him by saying, "Probably the most effeminate man I've ever met." Orla filled the rest in on Art's backstory. John came running to the car, soaking wet, climbed into the back. After the usual greetings and a few comments about how wet he was, Orla turned to look at John and said, "Hey, you work with Art. I know him." "Wow, lucky you," John moaned. She explained to John how they'd met. John scowled and nearly spit disgust at the thought of Art. He rattled off a few lines, including that mincing prima donna never does a damn thing at work. "I hate that bastard. I'm soaked to the bone and he's crying about his goddamn hair. Our gay-ass manager throws all the stuff on me and lets Art get by with anything he wants." Orla said, "You know he's a female impersonator. He has a regular gig at some club where he sings. He goes by the name of Sonya." I'd been looking at John as Orla told the story, and as soon as she said Sonya, a look of tragic grief passed across his face, replaced immediately by one of terror, then quickly followed by an expression of angst-filled dread, which just as fast melted into a head-down, barely moving, loose-muscled expression of complete despair, which he did not lose for the rest of the evening. I didn't say anything, but I knew at that point John had just figured out the girl he loved and pined after and the man he hated and despised were the same person. I also knew that probably only 3 people in the world were aware of this: John and I, who had just learned it, and Art, Sonya, who had known it all along. I love that story. More later.